We're going to break a little bit from what we normally do, which is politics and current affairs around here. And we're gonna talk about a really fascinating story written by a long-time friend of mine, Sam Kennedy. He's down in Pennsylvania. He's originally a Massachusetts guy. He writes for The Morning Call, which is www.mcall.com, and he covers the health beat for them. And he wrote this story about this woman who had a 71-year-old woman who had a 140-pound tumor removed from her. It's really a fascinating story, and it may get you to run right to the doctor on Monday because she didn't think there's anything wrong with her. So we have Sam here. Hey, good afternoon, Sam Kennedy. Thank you for joining us.
Hey, Chris. How you doing?
I'm doing really good. So, Sam, I have this story. I read it. I follow. I'm the only guy in Massachusetts, except your parents probably, who reads the health beat of the Pennsylvania Morning Call. But Sam, tell us about this story and how you discovered it.
Well, the hospital alerted us to the story after the tumor was removed, and obviously it jumped right out as a great story with the potential to go viral because it's just so shocking. And the interesting thing about it is this woman was as surprised as anyone. She had lived with this thing for a decade and a half, and it grew slowly over that time. And she didn't realize anything was wrong. She's really a character to talk to, just an optimist by nature. And she's a happy person. And so when she went to her family doctor, and her family doctor teased her about eating too much fudge, she thought she was just getting fat. And then finally, one day, after it had gotten so big, she couldn't get out of bed. And at her son's urging, she went to the hospital. And that's when the discovery was made.
Folks, we're talking to Sam Kennedy, who wrote a story about this woman, Mary Clancy, down in Pennsylvania, who had a 140-pound cancerous tumor removed from her. And she was living with it for 15 years?
For at least 15 years. It might have even been a little bit longer. Of course, at first it was small. And it was just over time that it gradually got bigger and bigger. And I really think that explains how something like this happens. When the growth is so slow over such a long period of time, you don't really notice that there's something dramatically wrong with you.
And she ultimately, though, she ended up she was having a hard time breathing, right? It was that big?
In the end, as she was having trouble breathing, she went to the hospital, and the doctors knew something was wrong because she was struggling to talk. The doctor said that she could only speak a couple of words before having to catch her breath, and that's because the tumor was pressing against her diaphragm. And so then they sent her in for a CAT scan, and when the results came back, the doctors couldn't believe what they were looking at because they had never seen anything like it before. The tumor was so big that you couldn't fit it in the image, and you could see it pressing against her internal organs, which were sort of squeezed into one corner of the image.
It's a fascinating story, folks. I encourage you to go to www.mcall.com and look for it. The name of the article is Doctors at LVHN Remove Woman's 140-pound Tumor. Now, you're saying she's a very delightful woman.
Yes.
And how's she doing today?
She is doing great. She feels like she has a new lease on life. Not only was the tumor 140 pounds, but the excess skin and abdominal muscle that had to be removed was another 40 pounds. So she lost 180 pounds. She came into the hospital one day last November weighing 365 pounds. 5 hours later, she weighed half that.
Wow. It's absolutely... Now, Sam, this story's good because she seems like she's going to be okay. As you point out in the story, she doesn't even need any sort of follow-up in terms of chemotherapy or radiation. So it's...
She just took Tylenol after the operation. That's all she took. She barely felt any pain whatsoever. But she has had some trouble walking. Her balance is off because she was used to carrying this mass in front of her. I mean, if for anyone who lifts weights, that's those are 3 heavy plates that she had, or more than 3 heavy plates that she had, tugging on the front of her. And so her back muscles grew really big to compensate. And now that she doesn't have that weight, hanging off the front of her, she's sort of off balance. In addition to that, because she was carrying around the extra weight, she developed some arthritis in her knees, so that's a problem. But she is up on her feet, getting around with the use of a walker. And that's more than she was able to do right before the tumor was discovered. Before that, she really wasn't able to go outside and do things. She wasn't able to go shopping. It was becoming, at the end, it was becoming a desperate situation.
Sam, what any thoughts on her family doctor who never noticed this?
That's what everybody asks about. And I asked the doctor who one of the doctors who performed the surgery on her. His name is Dr. Boulay. And I thought he was very tactful. He said, yeah, obviously something was overlooked, but I can understand how this would happen because the tumor itself didn't have any rough edges. One of the things doctors look for when they're searching for a cancerous growth is a rough edge. In this tumor didn't have any, so it kind of felt like a big blob. And so I think most of us think the doctor could have done something a little bit more, but her family doctor that let this go undiscovered. But the surgeon who performed the removal, he was forgiving in his assessment.
And she apparently was happy-go-lucky and wasn't suffering any kind of pain, at least not until right up till the end. So if she wasn't showing any symptoms and not complaining, I guess you can understand that.
Right. The tumor itself wasn't causing any pain. There were these secondary aggravations, such as the sore knees and the difficulty breathing. But the tumor itself was absolutely painless. And I asked her if she had gone to a gynecologist, because a gynecologist probably would have been able to figure out there was something wrong. And she said, oh, yeah, years ago. And so I'm not quite clear how many years ago, but perhaps there was something more she could have done to take care of her own health.
Yeah, if you're listening to this story, maybe you haven't been to the doctor in a while, maybe this would be a spur to get there. We're speaking with Sam Kennedy, who's a reporter with the Morning Call, which is a Pennsylvania newspaper, about a woman down there who had a 140-pound, 15-year-old tumor removed from her. Sam, that tumor was almost able to get a driver's permit. It was so old.
Well, I describe this as carrying a baby that you never give birth to and that grows into an adulthood. 140 pounds, that is the size of an adult woman. And she carried around. She went about her business with it.
It's but now, Sam, you this is a really well-written article, interestingly written. You talk a little bit about the surgery and how many people were involved in removing this.
Yeah, it was no ordinary day in the operating room. There was a team of 10 surgeons, actually 2 teams of 5 surgeons. One was focused on the tumor removal, and the other one was focused on the plastic surgery immediately after. So when the tumor was removed, in the seconds afterwards, someone in the operating room took a picture, and I saw that picture, and it's really quite astounding. The tumor was rolled out of her. She was so big, right? Ordinarily, when you operate on an ovarian tumor, the patient lies on her back.
Okay.
But the doctor knew he wouldn't be able to reach in and take it out because he'd be leaning over her. He wasn't sure if he'd have the arm and back strength to carry a 140-pound mass. And in addition to that, he expected it to be slippery, and he didn't want it to slip out of his hands. He said it could pop.
Right.
He described it as sort of like a ball with a rind around it, and he didn't want to pierce the rind. So obviously that would get messy.
Right.
So they had her lean on her side, and then they cut an enormous incision. Then they had to disconnect the tumor from its blood supply. The doctor said it basically had its own aorta. It needed that much blood. So Mary's heart was doing the work of two people.
Wow.
And once they clamped those veins down, and there were a number of them, not too many, but a number. Then basically the tumor, like this great big yoga ball filled with water, was loose, and they rolled it out of the cavity onto a table sitting next to her. And the cavity itself is, imagine how 140 tumor, right? 140-pound tumor. The cavity itself is like, it's cavernous, and you can see that in the background of the photograph. And then they had to cut off the excess skin and abdominal muscle and put her back together. And that procedure went really well. The doctor said sometimes when you cut patients open to remove a cancerous tumor, you don't know what you're going to find. You don't know what it's going to be connected to. It could be connected to another organ. That wasn't the case with this one. Besides the fact that it was so big, everything else went really well. It was actually a fairly simple procedure because it wasn't connected to bones or to organs.
Yeah, she's a very lucky woman.
That's exactly. That's what she says. I mean, unlucky and then lucky.
Yes.
But at this point, she feels great, and she didn't expect to feel this young and vibrant ever again. And now she's able to go shopping with her girlfriends. She's able to play with her grandchildren, and you can tell she's just radiant.
And all she took was Tylenol after the surgery.
And that's all she took was Tylenol. It's astounding, but that's what the doctor said.
What did they do with the tumor? What do they do with these things?
That's a good question. I asked that too, and I was told that the tumor was so big they couldn't send it directly to the pathology lab because they didn't have a scale there big enough to weigh it. So they sent it to the morgue, to the hospital's morgue, because there was a scale that was big enough. After they weighed it and came to the determination that it weighed 140 pounds, they then sent it to the pathology lab to be dissected and for it to be tested. They look for cancerous cells to try to figure out what kind of cancerous cells. And basically they concluded that it was a malignant kind of cancer, but a very non-aggressive variety. And that accounts for the fact that she doesn't need radiation or chemotherapy. When they removed the tumor from her, they removed 100% of the cancer cells. All the cancerous cells were contained within that rind. And that's one of the reasons the doctors didn't want to puncture the rind, because if it had spilled cancerous cells into her, they could have gone on and reproduced themselves and created more tumors.
Oh, that's interesting. I wondered about that. I wondered if it was just a hygiene issue, but no, you're saying that had they punctured the rind on this, it could have then caused additional infections.
It could have led to the spread of cancer to the other parts of her body.
Yeah,
I think it also would have been a hygiene issue.
Yeah, I would suspect that's the case, Sam. This is just a fascinating story. We're speaking with Sam Kennedy, who's with The Morning Call. He's their health reporter. You can read the story in its entirety at www.mcall.com. And there are pictures on there as well, right, Sam?
There are pictures. The most graphic pictures aren't on the website, but there are pictures of her before and after, and there's also a picture of her immediately before the operations. And what you see is her lying on her side in her exposed midsection, so you can see what that looks like. And it's funny, if you look at the before pictures of her, she looked, as she describes herself, as a roly-poly old lady, right? Those are her words, not mine. And she kind of looks that way. She's got on, baggy clothes, big bulky sweater. But then on the operating table, you can see that she really wasn't a roly-poly old lady. She just had a great big ball in her stomach, sort of like after a python swallows a pig. And in their skin is really, is tight and stretched, and the rest of her body is actually fairly slim and actually toned for a 71-year-old. Like, she has muscle tone. And I think that's just because she was carrying around all that weight.
Well, that's right.
She was getting a lot of exercise every day, just doing things like household chores or walking up and down stairs.
All right, she was carrying around, as you said, they took off 180 pounds off of her between the tumor and then the tissue that had surrounded the tumor. So she's 71 years old, and she, other than that, it seems like she's in pretty good shape.
She is in pretty good shape. The doctors expect a full recovery, and with physical therapy, they expect her walking to improve. Hopefully she won't need to use the walker before too long, and the arthritis in her knees might improve, too, now that she's not carrying around all that weight.
Yeah. Hey, we've been talking to Sam Kennedy, who works for the Morning Call. He's originally a Massachusetts guy. You can read this article at www.mcall.com, and there's also pictures there. The title of the article is Doctors at LVHN Remove Woman's 140-Pound Tumor. Guys, I encourage you to go check out the article and read it. It's really well written, and it's just a fascinating story. And I think it's so fascinating because it's, at least so far, has a happy ending. Right, Sam?
It does have a happy ending, and that's what she said. She said, "This is my happy ending." And obviously, when someone is infected with malignant cancer, it doesn't always turn out that way. And if someone has a tumor or a cyst, it doesn't always that even if it's non-cancerous, it doesn't turn out this way. I read an article on the internet, and we know you can believe everything you read on the internet.
Certainly.
But there was a guy who had a 130-pound tumor caused by an ingrown hair, and that was removed in California, I think, a couple years ago. And the record size cancerous tumor, and this was also an ovarian tumor, was 300 pounds.
Good Lord.
That was removed in California in the early 1990s.
A 300-pound tumor?
Yeah, in an obese woman who hadn't seen the doctor for a long time. I think she had anxiety. She was afraid to see crowds, and so she just stayed in her house. And because she was obese, it was, and she didn't see a doctor, it was, nobody knew what was growing within her.
That is, Sam, you've certainly got an interesting beat as a reporter.
Yeah, the healthcare beat is it is an interesting beat. The medical oddities are always fun to learn about, but I like the beat too because it delves into so many things. I write about the science of healthcare and the business of healthcare and the politics of healthcare, and those are all things that affect all of us.
Sure. So absolutely. But then you get a nice story like this every once in a while that, I'll tell you, when I read it, I said, this story is something my audience absolutely has to hear. Hey, Sam, thank you so much for joining us. Hopefully we can get you on in the future, and if you're ever back up here in Massachusetts, maybe you can stop by the studio.
Sounds great. Thanks so much for taking the time to talk to me.
Thanks a lot, Sam. Have a great day. Okay, folks, that was Sam Kennedy, who's a reporter with the Morning Call. As I said, he's a Massachusetts guy. Sam and I have been friends for a long time. And he wrote this fascinating story about this woman with the tumor, and I just thought you guys would really enjoy hearing it or be fascinated by it. And I guess the lesson from it is, go out there and get yourself checked out by a doctor, because you could have, this woman, it was in her for 15 years. 15 years. But fortunately, looks like Mary Clancy is going to be okay. She was really unlucky, but in the end turned out to be lucky, if that makes any sense. Hey, this is Chris McCarthy. You're listening to Sunday Brunch. We're going to take a quick commercial. We'll be right back.